Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great, and it's a great day to, go over some news and also what to do if you happen to find yourself with a middle draft position here in your upcoming fantasy draft. So thank you guys for tuning in and joining me today. None other than Fantasy Life Creative Lead and the voice of the Fantasy Life newsletter, Peter Overzet. Pete, happy fantasy draft season, man.
Yeah, man, it's a wild time. The all of our drafts are heating up. We got redraft, we got high stakes, we got best ball, we got industry leagues, we got guillotine. I mean, the action is flying right now.
Action is flying right now. And you know what a good way is to get on top of that action? Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus is our premium product over here at Fantasy Life. And rest assured, everyone, we're doing everything in our power to help you, a scholar, capture those fantasy championships. Because as much as, world events and family and friends might be important, winning your fantasy championships is what truly matters above all else. So whether it's our consensus rankings, projections, again, Dwayne's utilization suite, and my particular favorite, our draft champion tool, we are seriously trying to do everything in our power to get you guys set up. Also have League Sync, which allows you to literally just put in whatever league you have into our settings, and we'll recommend exactly what you should be doing from a roster construction standpoint. So check it out, Fantasy Life Plus. Tier 2 package, guys, costs less than a Chipotle burrito per month. Really going to be problematic if we end up signing a, sponsorship with Chipotle, because I keep, not exactly putting them down, friends with Chipotle. But yeah, it's cheap, not going to break the bank. Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. And with that, let's talk some news. Pete, it was a hectic Tuesday in the fantasy and, NFL news streets. Never a dull day, even when, again, no actual football is being played. But sadly, the injury gods are coming from someone who really had one of the more impressive debuts. Vikings rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy is undergoing knee surgery. Now, as is the case when any sort of injury news breaks, we get this steady stream of like 10 slightly altered tweets from all the NFL insiders and stuff. So initially it was, knee surgery. Oh my God, that doesn't sound good. But essentially he's getting his meniscus looked at. And as they're going to go in, the doctor is going to determine whether it's going to be a trim or a complete repair. Now, Dr. Edwin Porras from Fantasy Points has noted that if it is just going to be a trim of the meniscus, that's an injury with a timeline of roughly 6 weeks. He comped it to what Zach Wilson went through during the 2022 season. Now, they determine as a complete repair, that could be the season ender, and actually confirmed. Now we're looking at months if that is going to be the case. So, Pete, already we're expecting, Sam Darnold to be the starting quarterback for at least the first bit of the season. Now it's looking like that could be a bit longer. Knock on wood, as we always want to see, again, our young rookie quarterbacks and any NFL player for that matter be healthy. So we'll see what the final news is. But for now, Pete, it's looking like Sam Darnold's going to be QB1 in Minnesota. How's that make you feel in Fantasyland?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it seemed like Sam Darnold had that job on lockdown as is. All of the early reports out of camp were that McCarthy was really far behind, which is why I thought his preseason debut was notable. I wrote that in the newsletter on Monday. Dwayne had some awesome utilization nuggets. He actually really impressed. And I think it was kind of a vote of confidence for the entire offense that the weapons are here. Kevin O'Connell is in his bag as a play caller. And it gives me confidence that kind of no matter what happens at quarterback, I think we're going to get enough there to support the options that we want to be supported. Our Justin Jefferson's, Hawk when he returns, Addison if he doesn't get suspended, the running game. So for me, this is a bummer for JJ McCarthy specifically, probably delays when we get to see him. But overall, I'm not too concerned. I think Sam Darnold can be good for this offense, and I think he can get the guys we care about fantasy points.
I mean, after Kirk Cousins went down last year, we saw a combination of Joshua Dobbs, Nick Mullins, and Jaron Hall combined to average 16.2 fantasy points per game, which isn't this world-beating number. But, hey, you add Darnold in. To his credit, yeah, I'm doing a bit of the take away all the bad games he's played and focus on this small sample size recently thing, but he has been 11th in EPA per play over these past 2 seasons. Now, only one of those 7 starts included pass attempts higher than 26, so I think there's a reason why the teams he's been on, Panthers and then last year the 49ers, not exactly running, this high-octane passing attack when Darnold has been forced under center, but obviously has a great arm, went number 3 overall back in the day for a reason, and as Pete mentioned, did flash in that that preseason game, one of the best throws of the entire week with that layered intermediate dart to Jalen Naylor, I believe it was. And yeah, at a minimum, guys, maybe Kevin O'Connell and these weapons can help drag him along. So Kevin O'Connell, shout out Stephen Patton, 7th ranked play caller at the end of last year. And again, got a lot out of, pretty little at the quarterback position. So Pete, again, we love Justin Jefferson. Even the quote unquote faders are ranking him as the wide receiver 5 overall. But with Darnold, I mean, do you think there's something to be said for taking him around guys like Baker Mayfield, like Aaron Rodgers? Because as much as they might be better real life talents, Darnold averaged 17 rushing yards per game in each of his 3 full seasons as a starter. And, as much as I say he's around those guys, ADP is probably going to continue to be, in the low range, I'd imagine around 15 plus and more drafts than not. He's not even going to be drafted in most, one quarterback redraft leagues. But how do you feel about, again, throwing that late capital LATE around Darnold right now?
Yeah, like you said, I think in a standard redraft league where, guys like Darnold are going to be on the waiver to pick up, I want to take like a big swing. I'd even like take Daniel Jones and just be like, hey, if he's running a little bit, if Neighbors supercharges this offense, I can see the path to upside. I think what you're getting from Darnold is a pretty good floor, right? We saw Nick Mullins have 3 straight games of 20 plus points in this offense last year when they were trying to find their next quarterback, which, by the way, circling back to Justin Jefferson, he was on a 2,000-yard pace with Nick Mullins coming back from his injury. So again, I'm not worried about the quarterback play, but yeah, I think, if I do a lot of best ball teams, and right now, the whole thing you don't want to draft a guy who you don't think is going to play the whole year. Like, I don't touch the Raiders quarterbacks. I don't know. Is it going to be Gardner Minshew, AOC? Now that it seems like Sam Darnold, like, if we had to set the line, I mean, what is it at? Like over under 14 weeks or something? Like, I think we're going to see a lot of Darnold. So in best ball formats, I actually am a little bit open to taking him as a last round pick. Stack him up with Justin Jefferson. If you have that stack with those Minnesota players, I think he's on the menu.
Again, before Giants, 49ers, Texans, Packers, Jets bye to start the season, I would have thought we would have been seeing McCarthy in week 7. But now if he's not even really going to be healthy until the latter end of that stretch, it is looking like we're going to see Darnold for the majority of games here. So again, don't need to be drafting this guy. I mean, seriously, I had a draft with Jake Seeley in the Flex Crew a couple weekends ago. I got Anthony Richardson as my quarterback, early-ish or in the middle rounds. And then I was able to get Tua in round 16, last round of the draft in a 14-team league. So when you do only need one quarterback, guys like Darnold, again, not going to be touching them. But super flex, especially, you find yourself taking one quarterback in the first couple of rounds. Darnold is joining guys like Daniel Jones as those prime late-ish round options to close out the position. So with that said, had another big situation drop up, Justin Jefferson, obviously, at the top of the draft, but have some issues with CeeDee Lamb still holding out, and another wide receiver might now be joining CeeDee on the sideline. It's Bengals wide receiver 1, Jamar Chase. So, Pete, this has kind of been going under the radar. We've mentioned it a few times on the show, but Chase has been at every practice until yesterday. Now, he hasn't been practicing. It's been more of a hold-in situation as he awaits this hopeful contract extension, but doesn't really sound like it's coming. I mean, team president Mike Brown said, I'm not going to rule anything out, but I will tell you the die has probably been cast, talking about Chase wanting an extension back in July. So kind of a weird situation now. We had Zach Taylor, who's known for giving us absolutely nothing in the media, just say that Chase is day-to-day. So not sure we're going to be getting closure. But in terms of CeeDee versus Jamar Chase, like, do you think these are equivalent situations to be worried about, or is the newfound absence of Chase something that really should make drafters hesitate if you're pulling the trigger at 104, 105?
Yeah, I'm not worried about either of them. It does seem like the CD one is maybe slightly more concerning just because you have like CeeDee Lamb publicly like laughing at Jerry Jones's comments and Dallas kind of, that's been their MO. They did it kind of with the Dak thing there for a bit. And so I do worry about that being a little bit more combustible. But in general, I just want to use this as an opportunity to get a discount on an elite player. And, you and I, we write about these situations in the newsletter on Fantasy Life throughout the year. And time after time, this is just a way for these wide receivers to kind of save face, right? They're saying, hey, I am worth this. I deserve this contract. I see my peers getting these big contracts. And this is one of their only negotiation tactics, one of the few levers they can pull. They can go on Twitter. They can threaten a holdout. They can demand a trade. most times, and let's set aside the Ayuk case because that's kind of unique, but most times these guys end up getting something done with the team, or they stick their tail between their legs and they come back to camp because they don't want to actually miss game checks. They do not want to leave money on the table to make a point. So if you're going to give me, Jamar Chase, if people are going to start taking Jefferson and Monra ahead of him, like, I will happily scoop up Jamar Chase. I've seen CeeDee Lamb falling to 103, 104 in some drafts. Give me that all day. So I just think it's a buying opportunity.
I too am happy to take that discount. We'll be talking about what to do again with that 105 through 108 draft position here in the second half of the show. But yeah, Jamar Chase, wide receiver 4 in NFL history and career PPR points per game. Only Randy Moss, Rob Gronkowski, and Odell Beckham Jr. had more receiving touchdowns during the first 3 seasons of their career than Chase in the Moss era. So hopefully that closes out. But yeah, T. Higgins, also not a bad pick at all, regularly going in that wide receiver 3 tier, which I think is a bit underpriced if I do say so myself. Pete, last news really was a bit of a roller coaster. Tyrone Tracy, a pretty popular, sleeper running back going into later rounds of drafts. Giants RB2. First gets carted off the field in an air cast. I updated my rankings, took him out. Seemed like the season was over for the guy, but then it comes back. Not even a high ankle sprain, a low ankle sprain, despite, again, seemingly having his season yanked away from him. So not exactly going to be back at practice today. Ian Rappaport reported that he will be missing a few weeks and is considered week to week in a boot. So we'll probably see more of, preseason week 1 stud Eric Gray doing his thing. But for now, the Tyron Tracy bag seems safe. Take a sigh of relief, Pete. I know you've been drafting a lot of Tracy this offseason.
I have. I was one of the people who immediately goes and checks their exposures, and I was at like 9% Tracy, which for a late round pick is a pretty hefty amount there. It was so funny. I was like, we are so back with fantasy football because nothing says fantasy football like people just gnashing their teeth, weeping in the streets because a player is injured, people saying, take my ankle, I will be a sacrificial lamb. And then an hour later, they're like, yeah, he's fine. He's back at meetings. It was just a little sprain. Everyone's like, okay, we're good. So yeah, a huge sigh of relief there. Obviously, I talked about the McCarthy and Tracy things in the newsletter that came out this morning. By the way, free newsletter, guys, subscribe in your inbox 7 days a week now, breaking down all the news, all kinds of links to keep you guys up to date. But yeah, I think the thing I still get concerned about is these rookies who come in, and it's not like Tyrone Tracy had a lot of draft capital behind him. He was a late flyer. We all like him because he's this really athletic, versatile dude, played some, was it quarterback or was it wide receiver in college? Yeah. Wide receiver. And so we're always a sucker, similar to like Antonio Gibson, who played some wide receiver in college and comes in the league. But we're also still looking at a depth chart. The team is very committed to Devin Singletary. They love him. Eric Gray has a position on the depth chart. He showed out in week 1 of the preseason. And so I worry about slow starts for rookies because they have to earn the trust. They have to build up that rapport with the offense. And a guy with his capital, the team's not going to feel forced to get him on the field right away. So maybe I'm being the Debbie Downer. I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. Like, I'm so relieved he is going to be good to go. And yet I do worry it might take a while for Tyrone Tracy to actually be a fantasy factor.
Yeah, I've seen some people, again, almost like similar to Trey Benson, James Conner situation. Some people have implied that Tracy could yank away the starting job from Singletary. I've never seen that coming. To me, this is a pure speculative handcuff pick in the final 2 or 3 rounds of your fantasy draft. But yeah, not ideal, particularly considering how good it was looking for him this time last week. I mean, 89% of the snaps with Drew Lock under center in that preseason game. And it's a good example of us following, again, the usage more so than the performance, which obviously Eric Gray had going for himself. But Tracy didn't look bad either. I mean, I had an article go live on FantasyLife yesterday, my 21 preseason takeaways. And with Tracy, it was both the usage and like raw snap counts, but also the reality they were running him up the middle. Him and Bucky Irving were 2 guys where based kind of on, Irving size, and then just the reality that Tracy hasn't been playing running back all that long. I didn't know if they were going to be typecast into more of a scat back role, but it seemed like in both instances, their offenses were willing to use them as, a theoretical 3-down talent at the position. So chill a bit on Tracy, but hey, at least he is not, going to be missing this entire season. Get well soon for, Pete's bank account's sake. Also with the Giants, we'll just quickly note that Malik Neighbors believes there is quote unquote, no doubt he'll be ready for week 1. Brian Dable echoed that sentiment and said he is quote unquote good and the ankle injury is not long-term. So another big sigh of relief out of Giants camp. And yeah, injury gods for at least a little bit of yesterday not being all that cruel to us fantasy managers. All right, guys, those are the big three news items. Have a few more things to quickly go through, though, before we go ahead and get into what to do from a mid draft position. First of all, Dan Campbell, nice update this morning on Jahmyr Gibbs. Quote unquote, I think we're going to be fine here, so I think we'll be good. I know, not the exactly most in-depth words on Jahmyr Gibbs, but seemingly positive news. Please, please, please don't let your hamstring be too injured. Alvin Kamara did leave practice with back tightness, so keep an eye on that. We don't have any further information. Similar sentiment with A.T. Perry and that ankle injury, currently battling for presumably a roster spot, maybe even a starting spot in New Orleans. Hollywood Brown expecting to miss 4 to 6 weeks per Jordan Schultz, kind of consistent with the initial 4-week timeline. But yeah, opening night is in 3 weeks, so there does seem like there's a chance that we don't see Brown until week 3 or week 4. We'll note that Dak Prescott is back at practice, dealing with that slight ankle issue, but Deuce Vaughn still out with a hamstring injury. So more and more Rico Dowdle hype coming your way. We'll say that Justin Watson replaced Hollywood Brown with the starters. Starters are Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. And at this point, people, I just adjusted my rankings yesterday. Just keep on moving Rashee Rice up. He's looking like potentially a steal in drafts because that suspension looking more and more likely that it is not coming until 2025. I would also note the Commander signed Martavis Bryant. Shout out to the former Steelers stud. But yes, that has been quite some time. Happy retirement, Tavon Austin, the only one. Highlights remain the absolute gold standard in our industry. Really, really fun player to watch at West Virginia, and even for portions of his NFL career. Will Levis has a new mayonnaise perfume. That whole storyline continues to just gross me out, but thought you guys needed to know. And more importantly, the Brandon Ayuk saga did get an update. So Rap Sheet told us that the Steelers and 49ers basically have a trade framework in place, but the 49ers are also waiting to hear on their long-term offer to Ayuk. So it sounds like this trade has been in place for a while, but now it's up to the 49ers to decide if they actually want to part ways with Ayuk. And then our People's Insider Ricky went ahead and told us that, in fact, the 49ers have up their offer to Ayuk as of yesterday. So hopefully the saga is finally coming to an end. But if I had to put my money on it, I do tend to think Ayuk is going to stay in San Fran at this point. Certainly would feel a lot better about all the times I drafted him as a wide receiver 12 if that ends up being the case. But that's the news, everybody. And now a quick word on Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Fantasy Life fans, let me ask you a question. Was your day hard enough for a Mike's Hard Lemonade? Are you in a slow draft that just won't end? Yes, I actually hate slow drafts. If you don't have an hour to do it, you got to do what you got to do. It's still a fantasy football draft, but my God, they just freaking annoy me. Were you one pick away from the perfect quarterback wide receiver stack, but got sniped? That's a regular occurrence in the Hartitz household as well. Dogs do not like when I start throwing things after that. But yeah, living the fantasy life is hard, and Mike's Hard Lemonade is the reward for a hard-earned thirst. Reward yourself today. Go to www.mikeshard.com to find out where you can get Mike's nearest you. Remember, hard days deserve a hard lemonade. All right, Pete, it is draft position week here on the Fantasy Life show. Yesterday, Dwayne and I talked about what to do if you are lucky enough to have a spot 101 through 104. And now we're going to keep on moving down with 105 through 108, the mid-round draft slot, if you will. So we were talking a little bit before the show, and as much as, I would prefer to have a top 4 pick if possible, you can argue that some of these middle round spots, man, are almost superior because if we look at it, CMC, Bijan, Breece, and then our top 5, arguably top 6 wide receivers. Obviously CD, Chase, Sun God, Jettas, and then AJ Brown, if you want to throw him in there as well. Who am I forgetting? Tyreek Hill, of course. Anyway, I do think we have a fairly clear 8 or 9 players, and then we start getting into Jahmyr Gibbs, who's banged up. We have Puka Nacua, who's a little bit banged up. Garrett Wilson, maybe we're a little less convinced about him making the leap. It does seem like there's arguably a tier drop-off after that first 8 or 9 guys. So I know you've done literally hundreds. Maybe you even got a 4-digit counter on the best ball drafts at this point. So not the exact same strategy as redraft, obviously, but how have you generally felt, when you are forced to draft out of the middle portions?
Yeah, in general, almost regardless of format, I like drafting in the middle because one, you can kind of read the room and you can anticipate a run. And that's very valuable too. Like if your room has these stretches where they're just chewing up all the running backs and you're like, holy cow, this is the last player in this tier, you kind of can read that and capitalize on it. And when you're picking at the turn, It's also basically impossible to get like 2 picks at value, right? You think, oh, there's this big slider. Maybe he falls to you at the turn. Okay, you scoop him up, but then you just took the faller and have to pick again. And often I find myself feeling like I'm having to reach at the turns just to go get my guy. When you're in the middle of the draft, you can have some of those drafts that line up where you're like, I'm getting my guy, value, 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 value. And it comes together in a really nice way. So I do like picking from the middle of the draft. And I do think the way ADP sets up, and we'll get into it here, I think it's perfect for home leagues to be in the middle of the draft, specifically in the early rounds. I think you can kind of basically control the draft board from that middle position.
A lot of flexibility, and I'm with you where when you are into turns, it's like you start looking at the ADP, and there's usually a pretty wide gap if you are trying to, force to reach on someone. So you're less likely to obviously get someone to come all the way back. Middle rounds, usually at the most looking at 11 or 12 picks, difference between when you're actually going from one round to the next. So might be a bit of a trick question here because I know a lot of us fancy the hero RB, zero RB strategies, regardless of where we happen to be starting. But, Dwayne and I were kind of going through some mocks yesterday, and both of us agreed that hero RB starts, when we are able to from early spots or best. Has there been a strategy you've really leaned to in the middle draft spots, or just kind of taking it as it goes? Because again, just looking at some of the regular ADP, I do think more of almost a pure zero RB approach makes sense because especially in those first 2 rounds, really have a good chance of getting 2 absolute studs at wide receiver. And then once we get into round 3, especially in home leagues, not so much over in the best ball streets where you can get dope running backs in round 6, but in home leagues, I think once we get to the middle parts of round 3 and 4, I just don't love the running backs that are left. So I do think, again, more times than not, if I am picking 105, 106, yeah, if a Breece Hall falls to me, okay, I'll take him and do a hero RB thing. But if I am taking a Justin Jefferson in round 1, I wouldn't be surprised, man, that I am going, 6, 7 rounds before I take my first running back.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I've been a very big proponent of zero RB over the years, but you have to also be very contextual to what is your scoring settings and what is the ADP, what are your league mates going to do. And I've written a few articles for Fantasy Life this offseason. I looked at the perfect Yahoo draft through 10 rounds, and then I also looked at the best values on all of the major redraft sites, and I used Underdog ADP as a way to help me unearth those because the underdog market is so sharp. And the conclusion I came to for basically whatever redraft site you're playing on, Yahoo, ESPN, Sleeper, and we do have ADP available for all of these sites up on Fantasy Life. This is free. With the premium, you can actually unlock something that shows the differences across those sites, but be sure to check it out if you're curious to kind of see where players might be valued. But what I found is that the wide receivers are massively undervalued on these sites. You can get guys with massive upside, like a Xavier Worthy, like a JSN, in the double-digit rounds. And so when I'm working through that, I'm like, man, I want to be taking wide receivers later because, like you said, the running backs are gone. You're looking at like Tyrone Tracy in the 12th in a redraft league like that. So my perfect strategy, if it breaks, would be to start running back. So the zero RB bro is advocating for double anchor. But like you said, it sometimes doesn't work out in round 1. If CMC, Bijan, and Breece are all off the table, I'm probably going to just take the receiver there. But if you can get one of them and you can come back and you can get a Kyron, you can get an Achane, maybe Gibbs falls because of this lingering injury, I think that is a dominant start to these redraft leagues. And then you can just hammer wide receiver. And Malik Neighbors goes in the 6th. Tank Dell goes in the 6th round. Yeah. I just have a hard time pulling the trigger on running backs after round 2. So I just want to get them early.
And man, there are some just select rookies that really freaking fall as well. I mean, we're talking about Brian Thomas Jr. having a pick position like in the 140s over on Yahoo. Nuts. I think he's going in the same, like, well past Brandon freaking Aubrey. We have people putting kickers ahead of some of these, first round wide receivers, for crying out loud. So it's a great point there, and something that, again, as Dwayne and I were going through the drafts, maybe I myself need to just be a little better at, because there are legit Jackson Smith and Jigba types wide receiver 4s that we wouldn't dream of being available this late. Actually, available this late. So with that, Pete, let's start getting into what we are looking at round by round. We're also going to be doing a screen share for our lovely YouTube listeners out there. And first thing I did want to show is the ADP tool that Pete was referencing, because again, you're fine. You guys can have your player takes and everything. I'm not saying that ADP is something you need to completely live by, but when you do look at certain players, like we'll just pull up Malik Neighbors real quick. I mean, even if you don't overly believe in Malik Neighbors, I mean, look, ESPN picked 64, Yahoo picked 69, Sleeper 39, and then the high stakes leagues, NFFC and FFPC, we're looking at top 41 overall picks. So again, just purely based on, okay, who are we trusting more? The more casual sites without, too much money being put in at this point, or the sites with, again, actively bunches of cash being thrown at these guys? Yeah, 2-round difference for Neighbors. I think he might be a bit undervalued in the home league. He's going to go on the limb there. But here is our ADP grid. This has Yahoo ADP. And with that, Pete, again, let's get into what we actually would be doing out of these middle spots, 5 through 8. Again, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson fall. I think to your point, it is a good idea to potentially just go ahead and take that dope running back, because we're going to have ample chances to help load up at least, our wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 spot later in the draft. But if we don't get, Breece or Bijan, maybe we're picking from 107, 108. I think I'm more than fine just taking the next best wide receiver available. And for me, it is CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown in that order. But honestly, I flip-flop between Jefferson and the Sun God throughout the offseason. I'm not overly attached. Are going to make a huge statement on taking either guy. So any strong leans here, or are you just more than anything happy to have a chance at getting one of these top 8 ballers?
Yeah, I think you're sitting pretty, like you said, if Bijan, Breece fall, or you get one of those alpha wide receivers in Chase or Jefferson. But you can see in the ADP where it can get dicey, right? Because if you come back in that second round, now what I'm probably doing is, even though he's below an ADP, I'm probably reaching on a guy like Achane at that point in the second round, because I start to worry, like, yeah, sure. I mean, Devontae Adams, Marvin Harrison, you got some nice picks there, maybe Puka falls. But then you get to the third round and it's like, holy cow. Now I'm having to take Joe Mixon and Rashad White in the third round.
Yeah.
And it's not saying those guys are bad picks by themselves. It's just relative to the wide receivers. You're taking him over Deebo Samuel. That seems bad to me there. And so that's the only thing about taking that wide receiver there in round 1, is I feel like I'm almost going to be committed to taking a running back in round 2.
And I guess that's where my initial point, where like sometimes it sets up nicely for more of a pure zero RB mindset comes into play. Because if you do go wide receiver, and then we have Kyron, Henry, Gibbs already off the board, I don't mind taking Pacheco there. But to your point, I do have Devin Achane ranked higher. And that really is the point where you better get your running back, because I'm not going to be in round 3 taking Joe Mixon. I'm not going to be looking at James Cook or David Montgomery in round 4, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara in round 5. Personally, round 4 and 5, I like to get a lead at my onesie spots, tight end and quarterback. So getting one running back at least in these first 2 rounds, if not 2, a superhero mindset, I do think can make some sense, as long as, again, they are the right running backs. That's why we don't want to be overly attached to any single strategy when we go in. Definitely want to, take a page out of Bruce Lee's book, be like water, and go from there. So Pete, as we get into round 2 and round 3, again, you already mentioned being willing to kind of reach for Devin Achane. And honestly, just from the archetype, ability, and offenses, I don't think there's too good of a reason why Devin Achane continues to go, let's see, a full 14 spots behind Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, you can honestly rank them right next to each other, and I would not be overly disagreeing with you. So we get into these spots, kind of pick 17 through 20. Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London's another one of these guys where I think in all of our underdog ranks and just some of our, personal ranks, to me, London deserves to be right there next to Marv, right there next to Puka Nacua, but he is priced a bit down. So look, if you are in a sharper room, you think your home league actually knows what they're doing and all that, I'm okay taking Drake London, honestly, as early as the middle part of round 2. But hey, if you can get him in round 3, that's fine as well. So again, Pete, I think whether it's 2 running backs and 1 wide receiver, 2 wide receivers, 1 running back, maybe even 3 wide receivers, like, I'm not overly attached to one specific strategy that you need to do here. I will say, not going to be making too much of a habit of taking these tight ends or quarterbacks inside rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, I agree. There's too much opportunity cost. I do think it's a conversation when we get to 4 and 5, because then things starting to flatten out. But and one thing I always like to do as an exercise to help me figure out what I should do, and why you don't always just want to be like, I'm going to take best pick available, is it's helpful to do 2v2s. And say, if I go, like, say I know I'm going to get a running back and a wide receiver in rounds 2 and 3. All right, let's look from the middle spot. So a 2v2 would be like, I take Devontae Adams because he's there in the middle. And then I say it goes exactly like ADP. And then I know I need a running back. So I'm reaching for Joe Mixon in the middle. So I go Adams, Mixon. Or you can flip it and say you do my thing where you pull up Achane into the middle of the second round, and then you take Deebo when he comes back, or Drake or Nico. And it's like, what 2v2 do you like better? Achane with one of those wide receivers or Adams with Mixon? To me, it clearly favors the other side. And that's because I think Debo, London, and Nico can all make the case to be second round wide receivers next to Adams, next to Evans, next to Marvin Harrison. And so if that's a really flat tier, while I see more of a tier break from Achane to those other guys, I want to be on the good side of that 2v2.
And again, I think there's a pretty good argument. There's a tier break after guys like Marv and Drake London, which throws a little bit of a wrench in this because you can, again, potentially, have your cake and eat it too if you are able to get Achane and then someone like Drake London, in that round 3. But I'm with you. Once we're into Adams, Evans, Olave, Ayuk, Debo, Nico Collins sort of, guys, I think it's a really long tier 2. I mean, DJ Moore and DK Metcalf are going later. Jalen Waddle goes in freaking round, late round 4 all the way down here. So again, if you are able to get that stud running back at least 1 or 2 early, particularly as Pete kind of said at the top of the show, if you are in a situation where you're only starting, 2 wide receivers in your league format, or maybe it is, half PPR, definitely a situation to be, willing to roster at least one of those running backs early. But fun, place to go ahead and do that as well, everyone, over with our friends at DraftKings. Whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, Guardians, best record in MLB, by the way, tied with the Dodgers, but some would still say that's the best. There's an even better way to get on the action. Check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. And, it just makes life more fun. Because let's say, you're one of those sad souls forced to watch the Chicago White Sox 29-92. That's a real thing happening in this country, guys. 42 and a half games out of first place. Sorry to any White Sox fans listening, catching the strays, but yeah, you guys freaking suck. So if you are, unfortunately forced to deal with that, yeah, maybe bet in some other teams and, if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry because they have plenty of DFS and best ball options. I know personally I have been running through their $3 best ball entry. It just helps make life a little bit better. And, it's $3. So if you accidentally forget about it, dog runs away and you got to go chase it down. Definitely not speaking of a personal experience there. But yeah, a lot of different offerings, and I appreciate them for that. So new customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. All you got to do is download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FantasyLife. Remember, the crown is yours. All right, Pete, we've kind of gone through the first 3 rounds, and I do think in general, these are the rounds that are going to kind of set the strategy for the rest of your draft, particularly if you are like me and really like, dipping into the elite tight ends right around this spot, because whether it's Mark Andrews, Trey McBride, George Kittle, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts goes just a little bit later, but these are the areas where you're seeing the elite tight ends go off the board. And yeah, I'm fine ranking Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta ahead of these guys, but I don't know how anyone can have 2+ rounds conviction that they're necessarily going to be better than guys like Mark Andrews, like Trey McBride. So for me, Pete, again, not a given. Maybe they're already off the board, but when I can get one of these tight ends here, I'm a big fan. And honestly, Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, not the worst area to do this as well. If you do feel confident about your league, you have people in your league that are going to be taking kickers in round 8 and round 9 and defenses too early. If you think you're going to be able to get some studs in the later rounds, why not go ahead, get yourself a baller quarterback, get yourself a baller tight end? Because the other cool thing about this, Pete, is when you do use this high draft capital on the position, we're done. We're not taking 2 quarterbacks. Yep. We're not taking 2 tight ends. We have that elite option. So you're almost, buying yourself an extra late round pick to use as well if you want to go elite here in round 4 and 5.
Yeah, it gets tricky, right? Because I look at all of these rounds and I'm like, the wide receiver is probably the best pick, just in general, like where the value pockets are. And yet, one thing that I think you really want to do in redraft, right? You want to get off to a fast start. We talk about best ball a lot. When Achane scores 40 points in a week, it doesn't matter that you weren't scoring a lot of points before. You're going to get all those points and you're going to catch up. In redraft, if you start 0-3 and then he wins you your matchup, well, great, but now you're just to 1-3, right? It's harder to recover from a slow start. And so I'm always thinking, how do I get a rocked up starting lineup? And that often includes getting a solid tight end and a solid quarterback. And so that's why, as hard as it is for me to pass on, say in round, 5 here, or no, let's do this round that has George Kittle in it
Mhm.
right here in Dalton Kincaid. As much as I think T. Higgins and Devontae Smith and Amari Cooper are really solid picks in this range, I might lean to the tight end there, being like, I want to make sure I have an advantage against at least half of my league. Half of the league will also have good tight ends. The other half is going to have lesser tight ends. I want to make sure that I'm not taking sub 5-point scores from tight end, which we know can happen once you get past the top 9-10 tight ends there. So I do think in redraft leagues, as hard as it is to pass up on the value, I really like prioritizing elite players at the onesie positions.
And as much as, Dwayne McFarland wrote a fantastic article on his, perfect QB strategy, and Jaden Daniels is his favorite pick, I love Jaden Daniels too. And if I was able to go into every single one of my drafts and just say, round 9, I'm getting Jaden Daniels, no one else is allowed to pick him, yeah, guess what? That would change my strategy with what I'm doing, but that's not reality. And I do want to be careful about passing on guys like Richardson, Stroud, Burrow, and Kyler at this spot in the draft, just holding out hopes that I can maybe get Jaden Daniels, a few rounds later. So again, if it falls the way it does, then yeah, go ahead and get your guy JD in round 8 or 9, hopefully. But again, just because we have these cheaper archetypes, and I got in trouble with this last year, just saying, why would I, shouldn't have been on Darren Waller in the first place. Hand up, that was my initial problem. But I was like, why should I be taking, this tight end 3, Mark Andrews or whoever, when I can get Darren Waller so many rounds later? And, that's a fine enough mindset for why you might like Darren Waller. But I was almost pinning too much against the guy like Mark Andrews, who wasn't necessarily mispriced, even if there was a cheaper version out there. And I think that's what we're seeing with these quarterbacks here. Again, we have Jaden Daniels. We have, even a Deshaun Watson, these much cheaper dual threat options that you can argue are better values than Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson. But that doesn't mean Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray aren't pretty damn good in their own rights. And also, guys, as much as we do talk about these dual threat talents, I understand a lot of you are in, 5-point, 6-point passing touchdown leagues. Pete, if I'm in one of those situations, all of a sudden getting CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow around 4 or 5 makes a lot of sense to me, man, because those are two guys where if we look up at the end of the year, 4,500 plus passing yards and 40 plus touchdowns, that's in their potential range of outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it is. I agree with you too. And I love, like, Jaden Daniels is the perfect kind of quarterback for redraft because he's cheap. It allows you to load up on all these wide receiver values, grab your elite tight end while you're at it. And, a lot of the criticisms for Jaden Daniels are like, well, what if he gets hurt? He's going to run too much. And well, guess what? This is redraft. Sam Darnold's going to be on the waiver wire for you. You can go and pick up 20 points off the waiver wire each week. If the Jaden Daniels thing heads south, maybe the offense is more dysfunctional than we want. But in redraft, because you have the safety net of the waiver wire, I want to take the biggest swings possible. And I think a convenient analog for Daniels at the tight end position would be Brock Bowers. Like, there's ways it goes south for Brock Bowers. It is a huge committee with Michael Mayer. The offense is bottom 5. And it's just like, all right, I discard him. But the scenarios where the Brock Bowers talent profile, which is the best tight end prospect, you can go look at Dwayne's tight end supermodel that we've seen since Kyle Pitts, comes into the league and makes an instant impact in the same way Sam Laporta did last year. You just got an elite tight end at mid-tier tight end prices that could supercharge your early wide receiver and running back selection. So to me, I think about guys like Jaden Daniels, like Brock Bowers, as kind of my safety net. If you take away those top 7-8 options for me at the other positions, I'm still going to swing for the fences with these other selections, because guess what? If I don't hit on Brock Bowers, a Jonnu Smith, a Tyler Conklin is likely to be there for me on the waiver wire, and then I can patch together those points. So if I could impart one piece of wisdom, it's take really big swings, chase upside in redraft, because you can always get floor on the waiver wire.
Like the great philosopher Reese Bobby once said, first or last, and that should be applied to the fantasy football mindset as well. Unless you have one of those horrendous last place punishments, then maybe it's just first, and please, for the love of God, don't finish last. So, Pete, I think everything you just said honestly kind of sums up our strategy in round 6 through 9 here, and into the later rounds as well. But honestly, like through the first 5 rounds, you should take a good hard look at your roster, figure out where you need to adjust, and then fill out the positions from there. If you already have your quarterback and tight end, fantastic, you're done. If you don't, though, this is a situation round 8, round 9, we're going to be looking at a Jaden Daniels. This is where we got Tua and Goff and Purdy and Dak, Jordan Love, and all those guys going. I mean, this is when you can still get your low-end QB1 if you don't have one already. And a similar sentiment is true at tight end. Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Dallas Goedert. Again, by the end of round 9, that's when I think you're looking at quarterbacks and tight ends that you're not feeling all that good about, putting into the starting lineup. And from a similar sentiment with the wide receivers and running backs, hey, if you did go wide receiver heavy in the first 3 rounds, this is a spot where you can, again, start getting some of the more zero RB targets like Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, Devin Singletary, amongst others. So as much as I would love to just be able to sit here and say, oh yeah, round 6, you're taking a running back. Round 7, you're taking this wide receiver. Again, we can have our targets and that's fine. But more than anything, Pete, I think round 6 through 9, those are the adjuster rounds. That's where, again, you still have plenty of opportunities to help perfect your lineup, regardless of how it really started.
Yeah. And I think with the running back conversation, all of these running backs offer different things. And I think you want to know what you got from your early selections to inform what type of running backs you should be taking here. If you are in a true zero RB build and you haven't taken a running back until we get to this range, guys like Devin Singletary, guys like Bijan Robinson, guys like Tony Pollard, we know those guys are going to all get 15 plus touches week 1. Like their week 1 touches are bankable. I'm willing to say that. Chaos can happen. They do have league mates or backfield mates who could eat into it as the season progresses, but you're going to get points from those guys. What if you start RB? What if you're able to pull off that Bijan Achane start? Well, now I'm looking at Nick Chubb. Now I'm looking at Jonathan Brooks. These guys might not give me anything really early in the season, but I don't need it. I got 2 studs I'm playing every week. Then I can just swing for the fences and say, hey, by mid-season, Jonathan Brooks is cooking, Nick Chubb is cooking, and then I can really supercharge that existing running back room. So some of these guys can be kind of have your cake and eat it too. Like I think a guy like Zach Moss, I think he could give you early season production, but also continue it throughout the season and just be a very big part of a powerful offense. But some of these guys do offer one thing and not the other. And you should really think, what did I do at the beginning of the draft and how can I complement that later?
And again, once we get past round 9 into round 10, there are still some surprising wide receivers that I just, again, continue to get shocked they're available this late. But Keon Coleman, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., they're all carrying ADPs outside the top 120 picks. So again, kind of goes back to my initial idea that zero RB. Maybe this is the situation to go into it, because normally in drafts, I would be taking handcuff running backs at this point. But again, I think you can actually go a bit heavier than maybe you're comfortable at RB early, because we do still have these great options. I mean, I'll scroll down even more and you guys can see it. We got folks taking freaking kickers at this point. Jackson Smith and Jigba pick 122. Jamison Williams pick 130. I mean, Curtis Samuel pick 143. What a time to be alive in these later stages of the draft. But as you can see, I mean, Chase Brown pick 120. We have, the Trey Bensons, the Blake Corums of the world, also giving you some handcuff upside. Ty Chandler, Antonio Gibson, Rico Dowdle. These guys are all going outside the top 160 overall picks on ESPN over there at the moment. So again, a lot of good adjuster options there at the end of drafts. And with that, Pete, I think we're going to get into a little bit of a mock draft here in a bit to test what we've been learning. But first, we're going to pay a bit of homage. That's right, everyone. Our favorite, one of our favorite sponsors. We love all you guys. Our favorite clothing sponsor for sure. The fine folks over at Homage. Pete, we are rocking some shirts. I got Steve McNair and Eddie George in an NBA Jam style one. Loving that. You are rocking Mr. John Elway. So just want to take a few moments, be thankful for the fantasy stars of yesterday. So Pete, you are, been on the earth, been on the planet a couple, more years than I have at this point.
Wow.
I don't personally remember watching John Elway, but to each their own, man. Talk about, the Broncos 2-time Super Bowl champ.
Yeah, back in the olden days. No, it really was. Fantasy has since ruined traditional fandom for me. I grew up in Denver, and the Broncos had gone through this super long Super Bowl drought. They had never won one, and they had their heart broken in a few Super Bowls. The Niners just clobbered them. The Cowboys clobbered them. And so all of my relatives, my grandpa, who was just the biggest Broncos fan, I would just constantly hear their tales of, this Broncos team, they always get there, but can't get it done. And so as a kid, I was 10 years old when we won our first Super Bowl there against the Packers in 97. And that was like one of the most fun experiences I've ever had with sports. That Super Bowl game was absolutely iconic. You have the John Elway helicopter play where he rushed, and John Elway was not a mobile quarterback. Like, we think of him as like late stage Tom Brady, where it's like, this dude isn't taking off. He took off, got the first down, dove, got hit by the linebacker and spun around. It was also Terrell Davis had the migraines, but they brought him in as a decoy because Mike Shanahan's on the sideline said, they're not going to think we're going to run the ball if you're not in the game. You got to get in there. They do the play action score. So that game will always be imprinted in my head. And John Elway, man, just a total Denver legend.
Went ahead and even won another Super Bowl for the team as president, obviously overseeing the Peyton Manning years in Denver as well. So I know he was talking recently about wishing that, one of the bigger regrets was not drafting Josh Allen, because he's always liked those big quarterbacks. And at least early career John Elway, man, when you see some of the highlights, there was a bit of Josh Allen to his game, mostly just having an absolute bazooka for a right arm. I mean, again, some of those best throw compilations I've watched, on the NFL YouTube page, absolute lasers from Elway, one hash to another. Certainly one of the best talents we have ever seen at the position. But yeah, again, I'm rocking some Steve McNair, Eddie George. Had to, pay homage again to a Buckeye legend, Mr. Heisman himself, Eddie George. But man, those late 90s Titans teams were an absolute problem. Had some classic battles again, especially between Eddie and Ray Lewis and some of those good playoff games between the Ravens and Titans. But Steve McNair, co-MVP with Peyton Manning. I'm pretty sure that hasn't happened since, where we actually, couldn't find one guy to give it to. Certainly both guys were good enough to get some credit. And yeah, sadly, just 1 yard away from potentially sending Super Bowl in 1999. I believe the overtime might have even been to win it. So the play before that, though, again, the slant, the tackle at the 1 yard line, we all remember that. But McNair had a ridiculous scramble drill where he managed to go ahead and put them in that position to, extend the game anyway. So incredible talent. And honestly, man, Steve McNair, may he rest in peace, but you look at kind of what he did to help pave the way for some similar dual threat quarterbacks, which again wasn't a position that was getting a ton of love at that point in the NFL. So Steve McNair, Eddie George, we appreciate you guys. And yeah, just wanted to take a second to pay some homage to our friends over there. So if you guys want to get some of these shirts for yourself, it's homage, HOMAGE.com. Tons of really cool options. I know, Pete, you even like some of the Microsoft Paint editions going on as well. So NFL Blitz styles. I saw Dwayne McFarland rocking a dope Barry Sanders shirt. Check it out. And I will say they are comfy too. So appreciate our friends over at Homage. And now, Pete, let's get into a mock draft. Guys, if you've been listening to the Fantasy Life show, you know all about our draft champion tool at this point. But yeah, it is pretty freaking cool. Again, you can do regular fantasy, best ball, dynasty, pick your provider. You can even actually sync your league, whether you're on Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN, MFL, or FFPC, and then go from there again with those specific league settings. Personally, I'm in a lot of keeper leagues, which makes it frustrating to do regular mock drafts. But don't worry, we have a little keeper tool down here to help set you up. So we're going to do, again, just base Yahoo 12 teams. We'll do 3 starting wide receiver positions. And Pete, let's go ahead and draft from the 6th spot. And again, stick with the middle round ideas. So starting off the draft is going to go ahead and set up our draft room, and we will see what happens. Again, Dwayne and I did 2 of these yesterday. Second draft, we decided to take 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds for fun, and we were quickly in a bit of trouble. But again, once we start getting to round 10 and 11, pleasantly surprised with some of the wide receivers that were still available. So Pete, we're on the clock. Seems like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Breece Hall, and A.J. Brown, 3 good options. But as we've been talking, maybe we go ahead and just take Breece Hall here.
Yeah, and remind me, what scoring settings are we doing? Are we doing the half point PPR on this one?
Yeah, we'll call it half point.
Yeah. I'm good with either Breece or Bijan. I think they're both awesome picks here. Like we said, I think we'll like the wide receiver more later. I think we lock up one of these. Both of these guys can finish as the RB1 this year.
Yeah. Bijan also available. Gotta love that. So I went ahead and took Breece Hall. But again, as much as I do even prefer Bijan a little bit ahead of Breece, had a nice little back and forth with Dwayne about that at one point in the offseason. Tough to be too down on either guy. So into round 2, still have some quality running backs available. Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley. Also, we're getting into the wide receiver 2 range with Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, and Cooper Kupp. So pulling up the draft board and kind of seeing what some guys were doing. Yeah, Pete, looks like we are in a bit of a, 0 RB room. The wide receivers are flying off the board. And, we'll see what happens with the Gibbs injury. But based on what we've heard, not super severe. Being able to get Jahmyr Gibbs in the middle of round 2 sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, I think this room, we got some wild drafters in here. Someone took Ayuk in the second round. I think, yeah, I'm good with Gibbs here. It sounds like the early season, concerns with that injury aren't going to be massive. Yeah, maybe he's eased in a little bit, but giving him as a 1-2 punch there with our top guy makes so much sense.
Now we've got Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs through two. So guess what we say before, when you are going heavy RB, we're going to have to start adjusting a little bit and looking at some wide receivers. So still a little bit early, in my opinion, for the quarterbacks and tight ends. None of them have been taken yet, it appears. And again, that round 4, round 5 range is a little bit more preferable, I think, in terms of the opportunity cost you're devoting to the position. So Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Devonta Smith, Malik Neighbors, T. Higgins. Pete, I mean, we've seen how late Neighbors goes, so I'm not overly worried about that. Any particular leans between Pittman, Diggs, and Devonta? Personally, I'm cool getting some exposure to this Eagles offense.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing, having the opportunity, getting a guy who could just emerge as kind of like the alpha with a huge target share. I do think the two guys there at the top qualify,
Yeah.
Pittman and Diggs. I know Diggs has competition from Nico and Dell, but as we saw in the preseason, Dell wasn't even playing in 2 wide receiver sets. I think there's a chance Diggs like has a 28, 29, 30% target share in this offense. And in redraft, I love having that guy at the top where it's like, I don't have to worry about boom bust weeks. I just know you're going to be a huge part. I like Devonta Smith a lot. I think I'd lean Diggs and see if we could get someone similar to Smith to come back.
That's fair. And, we've talked about as well, I think it was on yesterday's show about, disparity between someone like Devonta and a T. Higgins and even Jalen Waddle, maybe a bit too wide. So as you guys can see here, at least YouTubers, we do have the percentage chance of, the player being available for our next pick. And Devonta is slightly more likely than what we would get from Diggs or Pittman. So let's go ahead and lock in Stephon Diggs there in round 3 as our wide receiver 1. So moving right along to round 4, had Malik Neighbors go early. Again, wide receiver heavy room we find ourselves in. And a good reminder that as much as ADPs help us, outline a guide, certainly can't expect to go into a draft and see everyone just taking, by the book picks each and every round. So still have some quality, quarterbacks available. Josh Allen available in round 4, which is interesting. No tight ends, I believe, off the board. Okay, Sam Laporta did go, but still have Travis Kelce. Pete, again, I think we're good at running back, Mixon, James Cook, Rachaad White. Not saying that they're bad picks, but when we already have 2, I'd like to get some exposure elsewhere. So George Pickens is someone where if Ayuk stays in San Fran, which seems likely, I certainly think he's a good bet here. Don't see too big of a gap between Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, and him, but we actually have a decent chance at getting those guys coming back. So Pete, I would say we could either go with George Pickens and fill that need, but you want to twist my arm and say, let's add Josh Allen or Travis Kelce to this team. Round 4, I'm okay with that. It's more round 2, round 3, where I don't want to be going out of my way for those guys.
Yeah, and I think this is where this tool is so powerful because we see here, like I kind of personally include Pickens in this next tier, especially if Ayuk ends up in Pittsburgh. But I think the tier value here is Travis Kelce. As far as getting this value. And a lot of these wide receivers, I think it's a longer tier. There's a lot of those rookies we talked about, a lot of the second year breakouts that I think I'm going to like. I say we lock up an elite tight end here.
Let's freaking do it. Travis Kelce, come on down. My tight end 1. And yeah, again, quarterly deserves to be ranked. But if he is going closer to McBride and Andrews and Kincaid, certainly don't mind locking that up. So we are now, guess what, everyone, good at tight end as we continue to progress through. So round 5 coming in hot. Lamar Jackson is still available, which is interesting. But we do have, pretty decent chances of being able to get one of Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud. Definitely Kyler Murray or Joe Burrow on our next pick. So again, given that we kind of did a luxury pick there with Travis Kelce, Pete, I do think it might be time to go back for a wide receiver. I mentioned it before. I guess having Kelce makes me a little wary about getting the multiple Chiefs wide receivers, but man, Rashee Rice is someone where as long as we're there in week 1, man, he's going to be ranked as probably a top 20, if not even top 15 or 12 wide receiver. But that said, we do have, 290-pound Keenan Allen there, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson. We still got some good wide receiver options here in round 5. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I guess I don't mind having the two Chiefs players here. I think there's a lot of ways it can work, right? Like Mahomes goes nuclear, has a 5,000-yard season. That shouldn't be crazy to anyone. And both Rashi Rice and Travis Kelsey are feasting. Or it's maybe they are kind of like load managing Kelsey at times, and Rashi Rice
Mhm.
gets off to a fast start. Maybe Rashi Rice does get that suspension at a point, and then Travis Kelsey has to become the focal point. Like, I like all the ways this could break. And if he doesn't get suspended and this offense has a career year, behind Patrick Mahomes, which I think they are set up to. Their weapons were so bad. Let's get Rashi Rice here.
We got us some Rashi Rice. Gotta love that. Moving on to round 6 now. Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow available. Kind of a tear break after them once we get into the Dak, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Jaden Daniels side of things. That said, still do have Deontay Johnson, Roma Dunze, and company available there. So I know I've been a pretty big fan of Deontay Johnson, Pete, and this is a decent tear break. I mean, not saying a
Yeah.
Dunze and Hopkins, Worthy couldn't work out, but I mean, out of all these guys, I think it's pretty clear that Deontay has the best chance to breeze past 150 targets. So only have 2 wide receivers at this point. We do have 3 wide receiver starting spots here. As much as I wouldn't mind taking a luxury quarterback, still have a decent chance, 40% specifically, getting Kyler on the wraparound. I think it's worthwhile risking that and then going with Deontay here. What say you?
Yeah. I think Deontay is the perfect pick here. He also kind of fits that mold that we were talking about before of like, we're not going to have to guess his good weeks. Like, he's going to
Yeah.
earn a consistent amount of targets. And yeah, you can have concerns about the offense, but Deontay Johnson's role, I think, is pretty solidified. And when you are a little lighter at wide receiver, I think he's the perfect pick to kind of anchor your position.
Managed to get Kyler Murray falling back to us, which is lovely when that works out that way. So we will go ahead and, I'm making an executive decision here, Pete. We are going Kyler Murray in round 7.
Wow.
Again, kind of broke the wide receiver tier a little bit. Still got our 2 stud running backs. But at this point now, sitting through 7 rounds, we got Kyler Murray, we got Breece Hall, Jameer Gibbs, Stephon Diggs, Rashee Rice, and Deontay Johnson with Travis Kelsey. I mean, seems like a pretty formidable, starting lineup to me. Again, maybe not the deepest at wide receiver, but as we continue to go on, it is a position we can continue to add to. So we'll say running back, could be back on the table. Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary topping the charts for right now. That said, Pete, also have Lab McConkey, JSN, Cortland Sutton at wide receiver. So look, we'll do another pick or two, but at this point in the draft, we got Kyler, we got Kelsey. We're more or less just going to be cycling between running backs and wide receivers, whoever you guys prefer. We just want to end up with, around 6 or 7 apiece. So any particular thoughts here, Pete?
Give me JSN. I think another guy who we could see the breakout and feel good about starting him every single week.
Again, still guys like Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas available later. And, again, a good example of that. As much as I do like some of the ADP values late, can't always guarantee that's going to be coming in. So I will say Jonathan Brooks setting up fantastic, having a chance to get him in round 9 because we have the sort of lineup where we have Breece Hall and Jameer Gibbs already. So take your time, Jonathan. We don't need to start you. We got 4 wide receivers we feel good about. Now we got Jonathan Brooks who can hopefully help us out in the second half of the season. And this, I'll kind of fly through the rest of these, but Tajay Spears, Chase Brown, Gus Edwards, Ezekiel Elliott available pretty late. Does say we have a chance at getting, Chase Brown here a little bit later. So God, these wide receivers got gross in a hurry, but we'll go ahead and throw out Romeo Dobbs, Jordan Love's favorite guy ever on the squad. Hopefully get Chase Brown wrapping back around. But yeah, Pete, again, went ahead and I think we showed that going with Breece Hall and Jameer Gibbs to start isn't necessarily a death blow when you are able to, again, get guys like Deontay Johnson, Rashee Rice, JSN available a bit later than maybe we're used to in some of the best ball streets.
Yeah, and this team, and I mean, it makes sense. We were drafting it, but like this is exactly how I would want to attack the redraft league. You get the 2 elite running backs, you prioritize an elite tight end. We got a value on the elite quarterback, and then we just see, boom, all these wide receiver value picks there. We kind of had a tough choice when we took Jonathan Brooks. I think we could have taken Brian Thomas there as well and seen, and that's where you start to read your room. Like, is it a running back heavy room? Is it a wide receiver heavy room? What do you think you can get away with? But yeah, this is exactly how I want to be building teams in redraft this year.
finishing this out now, and that should be it. So we will ask them to rate our draft. Look, I love our draft champion tool. It is going to yell at us about only taking one quarterback and tight end. So just realize that we did get, again, as much as they want to say our position ranks are a bit down there. Oh, okay. They did give us love for the Travis Kelce pick, but I'm going to ignore the fact that the QB's 10th when Kyler Murray is certainly a top 8 guy. So starting lineup, again, picking out of the 106, going heavy with Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs in round 1 and 2. Was able to get a somewhat falling Kyler Murray in, I believe, round 7 or 8. Stephon Diggs, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson filling out the wide receiver room. Travis Kelce in the 4th felt like he was the best available pick there. Jackson Smith and Jigba rounding out the flex. I do agree with Pete in hindsight. As much as Jonathan Brooks looks good on the bench, I mean, we were still able to get guys like Chase Brown and Rico Dowdle and Ray Davis later, who also do have some upside. Not as much as Jonathan Brooks, but I do think the gap between those running backs probably a bit smaller versus our other wide receivers we had to land on with Romeo Doubs and Demarcus Robinson. Being able to get that Keon or Brian Thomas, one of those cheaper first-round rookies, probably is advisable. So, talking at look, Dwayne McFarland's beautiful face, someone that we are drafting like. Overall 5th, Pete, I think it was a pretty good squad.
Yeah, I like it. And the whole point of this is you can come and try it from different slots, see how it goes. Not every room is going to be equal. Kind of knowing what your opponents do can be very helpful. And you can kind of toggle some of those settings to get a room that's very similar to what you are likely to experience.
And again, I didn't even do that. We just did kind of general base settings. But yeah, you can actually go in and say, have the computers draft more like hero RB drafters or RB heavy drafters. Again, so many customizable features. So gotta love that. And gotta love you out there for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We'll be back tomorrow. Dwayne McFarland back in the house going through late draft positions. Make sure you're there for that. And otherwise, check out everything Fantasy Life has to offer. Again, Pete grinding that newsletter daily. So make sure you subscribe to all that free goodness. So for Pete, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.